It wasn't always like this. I used to believe one day they'd see me. When I was 10, I spent 3 days building a desk in the garage from broken table legs and warped plywood. I scavenged from the curb. I stained it with coffee grounds and sealed it with clear nail polish. I left it in the hallway, placed it like an offering. Hopeful. My father walked past it on the way to the laundry room and muttered, "Whose trash is this?" That's the moment I learned applause wasn't coming. Growing up, I wasn't the misunderstood genius or the quiet prodigy. I was just invisible. Not in some poetic way in the actual practical sense. People forgot to pick me up from school. Teachers called me Aubrey's sister for years. At family barbecues, I was asked to take the group photo, never in it. Aubrey was magnetic. She had dimples that could get her out of anything, the kind of smile that made strangers offer her free ice cream. She won spelling bees, sang at holiday shows, mastered piano by 12. Her trophies had their own shelf. Mine were boxed in the garage. Once I got second place at a regional coding competition. She got a balloon bouquet for making the cheer squad. I didn't resent her. Not at first. I just thought maybe if I worked harder, they'd notice. While she was rehearsing her solo for the winter pageant, I was curled up on the floor learning Python from an old O'Reilly book I checked out with my own allowance. I didn't need cheers. I needed silent structure. I loved the hum of old desktop fans, the rhythmic click of mechanical keyboards. I built my first script at 13 to automate the school's cafeteria feedback form. No one knew, but it worked. Still in our house, if it couldn't be photographed or bragged about at church, it didn't count. Once my mother asked me to log off and help with something real. I had just completed a UX overhaul for a small civic tech nonprofit. She told people I was good with Pinterest. By college, it got worse. Aubrey went into marketing, sleek, visible, branded. She had intern swag bags and tropical photos captioned "grind." I took consulting jobs, worked odd hours, signed NDAs. When I landed a strategy gig that helped pivot a failing wellness app into $1 million acquisition, I couldn't even tell them. My mother introduced me that Thanksgiving as between jobs, I think. I had just negotiated a licensing agreement that netted my client over $2.2 million. I smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. But these were just the early scars. What really changed me were the paper cuts, the everyday omissions that whispered, "You don't matter." Aubrey once told mutual friends I was doing something with blogs or Etsy or whatever. At her birthday dinner, she tagged every guest on Instagram except me. When I confronted her once gently, she shrugged. It's not that deep, but it was. It was the depth of knowing I had become a placeholder in my own story, someone to round out a table fill space in a photo, maybe run errands but never receive credit. I stopped correcting people. There's a kind of tired that makes silence feel like protection. So when her wedding invitation came, I accepted quietly. I picked the dress she requested, muted gray high neckline, no sparkle. I RSVP'd early, didn't ask for a +1. I even offered to help with setup. She replied, "You don't need to stress. Just come and enjoy." The day arrived cloudless and curated. Every moment was a scene from a magazine. Aubrey glided like chiffon royalty, her smile the centerpiece. I slipped into my seat without fuss near the DJ booth where the bass made conversation impossible. My place card was misspelled Sabina. I chuckled, moved it aside. It wasn't even the worst misspelling they'd used. As the ceremony ended and the reception began, I watched her hold court with relatives who forgot I existed. One uncle asked if I still lived in that little studio downtown. I had bought a condo 2 years earlier, cash. But I smiled, because what was the point? They had already chosen their version of me, the one they could box name and ignore. But that version was a ghost, and I had quietly buried her years ago. The reception was already humming. Light clinking of glasses, laughter bubbling over past hors d'oeuvres, that specific glow that weddings carry when the ceremony is over and the real party begins. I sat at table 19, not quite in the corner, but close enough that the only conversation I could hear clearly was from the speakers blaring a Bruno Mars song on loop. My table mates were Aubrey's co-workers and someone's old college roommate. Nobody made eye contact. No one asked who I was. Every so often, someone would hand me an empty glass, assuming I'd take it back to the bar. I did, out of habit, like muscle memory from a life spent cleaning up after other people's messes. Then he arrived. Cale Donnelly. Even if I hadn't recognized his face from a dozen business write-ups I would have known, his presence was immediate. He walked like gravity owed him something. Perfectly cut navy suit, no tie, a tousle of hair that probably cost more to style than my whole dress. People turned toward him like sunflowers chasing warmth. My mother spotted him first. She lit up like a candle, waved both arms like she was directing air traffic. Cale. Over here he smiled, polished, knowing, and headed straight for our table. My father rose so fast his chair screeched. Uncle Paul straightened his jacket. Even Cameron the groom stepped aside like he knew who the real star was. Cale shook hands, laughed at a joke, leaned in to compliment my mother's dress. Smooth, precise. Then he turned to Aubrey. "You look stunning," he said, eyes locked on hers. She did. That wasn't the problem. She had that bridal radiance like the world was arranged just for her. Then it happened. Cale lifted his champagne flute, tilted it toward her, and said, "Impressive crowd, Aubrey." I was standing less than 3 feet away. He didn't blink in my direction, didn't hesitate, didn't even have the basic, awkward courtesy of a nod. His gaze passed through me like I was part of the centerpiece, decorative but irrelevant. To him, I wasn't a person. I was air. And something shifted. I didn't flinch. I'd trained for this. Years of family dinners where I was introduced as an afterthought. Birthdays forgotten. Conversations rerouted around me like I was a piece of furniture. I had survived bigger insults than a cold shoulder from a tech CEO. But that smirk, that casual dismissal, that sentence impressive crowd, it wasn't about me personally. That was the point. I wasn't even a consideration, just an assumption that if I were standing there, it must be to refill someone's glass or adjust a napkin. And still, I could have let it go. I could have smiled, sat down, eaten my overpriced plate of grilled chicken and risotto, and disappeared again into the background like always. But something clicked. Not rage, not sadness, just resolve. The kind that forms like steel beneath the surface. Not loud, not flammable. Just final. Because here's what Cale Donnelly didn't know: I had written the report that killed his company's last funding round. Not directly, not with my name on the slide deck, but my analysis, deep data-backed, ruthless, was the reason Carradine Capital passed on investing in his Series B. I had flagged their customer churn, their over-reliance on a gamification model that bled users once the novelty wore off. I noted their legal stumbles during their Latin America rollout, the UX bugs in their onboarding funnel, the dip in retention during Q3. I wrote it all in a memo at 3:00 a.m., caffeine-fueled with citations, charts, and comparative benchmarks. It had been shared across 5 partners. They passed. And he never knew. Because men like Cale don't read footnotes. They only notice what shakes the table, not who's under it, propping the whole thing up. Until now. I stared at him, at the man who had cut through the room like a blade, so confident, so untouchable. And I thought, one sentence. That's all it takes. Not to humiliate, not to destroy, but to reclaim the space I'd been denied for years. Not just by him, by all of them. My family, my sister, every person who had mistaken my quiet for absence. I turned my glass slowly, the condensation cool beneath my fingertips. My pulse was steady, but I could feel the old adrenaline crawl in the familiar tingle before a big client meeting or a tough negotiation. Precision, timing, control. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the right moment. One sentence dropped like a scalpel, measured, sharp, clean. Because sometimes the loudest sound in a room is the one that breaks the story everyone thought they knew. I stood up, not abruptly, not with any grand gesture or clinking of glass, just a quiet, fluid rise like standing to stretch after a long meal. At first, no one noticed. The music had picked up and a few guests had migrated to the dance floor. My aunt was telling Cale about Aubrey's old college awards. My mother was adding how she had always been a natural leader. I walked toward him. No announcement, no theatrics, just movement calculated, grounded, inevitable. Cale was mid-sentence when I stopped beside him about a foot away. He didn't turn right away, probably assumed I was staff. Then I spoke, calm, even, unshaken. Just so you know, I said your Series B valuation's gonna drop if your platform keeps bleeding retention like this. That's it. One sentence. Like flipping a switch in a dark room. He blinked. Actually blinked. For a man like Cale, who probably hadn't been surprised in a boardroom in years, it was a microsecond of visible disorientation. His champagne tilted slightly. A single drop slid down the side and hit the floor. He turned fully toward me. A beat of silence. Then Aubrey? Who is this? My sister's smile faltered. That's my sister, Sabrina. The way she said it stumbling, confused like discovering a hidden drawer in a dresser she thought she'd memorized. Cale looked at me again. This time not like furniture, like a glitch in his matrix. Sabrina Hollis. I gave him a small nod. That's right. His eyes searched mine, and I saw it. Recognition. Slow, dawning, undeniable. Not because we'd ever met, but because somewhere in his mental archives he was matching dots he hadn't even realized were connected. He started. I smiled. We've never met officially, but your board has seen my comments, or at least the ones I filtered for Carradine. There it was. The shift. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Just awareness, sharp and undeniable. A man used to scanning rooms and categorizing people had just discovered he'd overlooked the only name that mattered. You work with Carradine Capital, he asked. Not a question, more like a memory clawing its way to the surface. Among others, I said voice neutral, that others carried weight. Carradine wasn't just another venture firm. It was one of the quiet kingmakers in tech, rarely public, always precise. The kind of firm that could make or break a startup in a single memo. I'd been consulting with them as a strategic advisor for nearly 5 years. Not full-time, not loudly, but consistently, deeply, and always with influence. I was the person founders never met, but whose notes shaped acquisition decisions and funding gates. Aubrey looked between us like we were speaking a different language. Wait, what's happening? She asked. Cale didn't answer. He was too busy running mental calculations, matching language from past reports, remembering the report his board cited, the one that stalled their expansion timeline. I remember your review, he said finally. It was direct. And accurate, I replied softly. He nodded. Yeah, it was. The silence that followed was charged. At nearby tables, people had started to hover, pretending to sip drinks, clearly eavesdropping. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Aubrey's jaw had tightened, her bridal glow dimmed by confusion, maybe even something like fear. You never told me you worked in tech, she hissed. Like, seriously worked. You never asked, I replied. Not bitter, just factual. She didn't argue because she knew it was true. Aubrey had spent so many years trimming me down to a version that made sense to her that she'd stopped listening before I had anything worth saying. Behind us, a groomsman who had ignored me earlier glanced over with sudden interest. Guests were shifting, whispering. Even my mother across the room had gone stiff with attention. She was watching now, watching like she had just heard a name she didn't realize carried weight. And Cale, he was quiet, alert. Like a man rereading a book he thought he knew. I wasn't aware they had... I didn't realize you didn't, I said gently. Most don't. That was enough. I didn't gloat, didn't twist the moment into a lecture. I simply stepped back and let the silence do the rest. Because sometimes the loudest statement is the absence of explanation. Let them catch up. Cale looked recalibrated. Not humbled, not embarrassed, just very, very aware. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card. May I, he asked? I nodded. He handed it to me. I'd appreciate a follow-up, he said. Sincere. focused. "I'll think about it," I replied. And then I returned to my table, Sabina, according to the place card, but not invisible. Not anymore. The air felt different, charged, shifted, like something tectonic had moved, quietly, permanently. I didn't sit right away, not because I was basking in anything, just because the weight of what had just shifted needed a moment to settle. I could feel it, the ripple. Before I was the person people passed by without comment, the one they asked to take photos, not be in them. Now the ripple was subtle, but unmistakable. A waiter paused as he cleared plates and gave me an extra second of eye contact. One of the groomsmen, Derek, I think the one who had earlier complimented Aubrey's marketing team like it was the Vatican, passed my table, slowed, and offered a quick nod. "Heard what you said to Cale," he muttered like it was a password. "Didn't know you were in the business." In a way, I replied. He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. Most of them wouldn't, and I wasn't going to waste time explaining. Let them sit with the ambiguity. Let them wonder. Two of my cousins approached next, Rachel and Amanda. They had once posted a meme in our family group chat calling freelancing code for unemployed. Now their voices were syrupy with curiosity. "You never mentioned you work in venture capital," Amanda said. I didn't correct her. Let them believe what they wanted. Titles don't matter, leverage does. Even Aunt Denise, who once pulled me aside and offered to help me apply for a real job, slid next to me near the dessert table, with a look that hovered between regret and calculation. "You've always been so private," she said as if it were a compliment. I gave her a soft smile. That's all right. I wasn't asking to be realized, but I knew who was watching most closely. My mother. Across the room, behind a cluster of centerpieces and well-groomed family pride, she stared. Her expression was tight eyebrows, drawn lips, thin posture, rigid. Not angry, just recalibrating. She didn't come over. That's not how my mother operates. She doesn't do apologies. She does positioning. She whispered something to Aunt Trudy, who nodded while sneaking glances my way. I knew that posture, chin tilted slightly, eyes calculating. Sabrina had become useful. That was the only kind of interesting she respected. Let her watch. The music thudded in the background, something upbeat and ironically titled "Good Vibes Only." People were dancing now. Aubrey's college friends held their heels in one hand and drinks in the other, laughing like they were still 21. I watched them twirl under chandeliers, knowing full well they'd remember none of this tomorrow. But the others, the ones who heard what I said to Cale, they'd remember that. The moment someone they overlooked took up space with one sentence, Aubrey was the last to move. She lingered near the bar for a while, probably reviewing the situation like a campaign manager post-debate. Her back was straight, her shoulders tense. Every smile looked practiced, now pulled tight across clenched teeth. Eventually, she approached. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, just a drift like she happened to be walking in my direction and simply didn't change course. "Can we talk?" she asked. I glanced at her. Her makeup was still perfect, but the corners of her mouth had stiffened. Her voice carried that same brittle note it always did when she felt things slipping just beyond her control. We stepped out onto the balcony. Twinkling lights were strung along the railings. The air was cooler out there, soft with the scent of roses and frost. It reminded me of high school, sneaking out to the porch with mugs of cocoa after family dinners got too loud. For a second, we were kids again. Then she spoke. "You made a scene." I didn't flinch. I spoke one sentence. In front of my boss. In front of mine, I replied. She crossed her arms. "You humiliated me." "No," I said. I reminded him I exist. That's not the same thing. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hated when I didn't rise to the bait. "You should have told me what you do," she said finally. "That you're... whatever that is." "I tried," I said, "years ago. You weren't interested. That's not fair. It's honest." She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. "Mom's already acting like she knew all along. She's going to tell people she's supported you from the beginning. She always rewrites the story," I said. "But you had the real version. You just didn't want to believe it." Silence stretched between us. That silence between sisters is thick, heavier than anger. It's where all the unsaid things sit lined up like ghosts. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't you ever fight for space? You let us treat you like background, and now you want center stage." I turned to her. "I don't want center stage," I said. "I never did, but I won't apologize for not being small enough to ignore anymore." Her mouth opened, then closed again. That old reflex to defend, dismiss, diminish just barely contained. And then, softer, more tentative than I expected, she asked, "Are you happy, Sabrina?" The question caught me off guard. I took a breath. "I'm at peace," I said. "I built a life I don't have to explain to anyone. That's more than happiness. That's freedom." She nodded slowly. It wasn't an apology, but maybe it was the closest she could get. We stood there a moment longer beneath strings of light as the sounds of clinking glasses and laughter floated through the door behind us. The wedding was still spinning on, but something inside it had changed. Not just for me, for all of them. When we walked back in, the cake had been cut. Guests were gathered around the dance floor, humming through familiar songs, slightly tipsy and unbothered. Aubrey slipped seamlessly back into her role host bride golden girl. But now something was different. She smiled tighter, laughed shorter. I recognized the tension in her jaw, not panic, not shame, just the discomfort of realizing you weren't the only headline in the room anymore. I didn't need to reclaim the spotlight. I just needed them to stop pretending I didn't exist. As I made my way toward my seat, still labeled Sabina, I caught Cale's eye from across the hall. This time, he didn't look through me. He looked at me. He raised his glass. Not the kind of toast you give when you're networking or trying to impress. This one was different. A nod, a gesture of respect, recognition, even caution. I didn't return it. Not out of spite. Just no need. That part was done. At my table, I picked up the final sip of champagne flat now and let it sit on my tongue. It tasted the same, but it felt different, because everything had shifted. I stayed for another 20 minutes, long enough to not make it a scene, just long enough for people to notice the space I took up and the silence I kept. The cousin who used to call me the weird one asked for my LinkedIn. The aunt who once offered to help me apply for admin jobs tried to pitch me her friend's startup idea. And my mother. She stayed on the opposite end of the room watching, always watching. It was her eyes I felt the most narrowed, calculating, whispering to Aunt Trudy, nodding toward me with tight-lipped curiosity. That's how my mother says sorry. She doesn't apologize. She reclassifies. Once you become useful, you become interesting. She'd rewrite the history in a heartbeat, say she always knew I was gifted, that she encouraged me in her own way, that she always saw something special in me. Let her. That version would keep her comfortable. She needed that more than I needed an apology. The truth didn't require her permission. Later, as the dance floor filled and the bouquet was tossed, I stepped outside, called for a car. The air was cooler now, crisp in a way that cleared your head. I reached into my purse and pulled out the wedding invitation. Heavy cardstock, Aubrey and Cameron in gold foil, ivory envelope. It was beautiful, curated, expected. But I didn't belong to that world. Not really, and that was okay. Because the real power wasn't in crashing the party. It was reminding them I'd been on the guest list all along, that I'd simply chosen to wait until the right moment to speak. I stood at the curb letting the headlights of arriving Ubers blur against the night. I thought about all the years I let them write my narrative, all the times I nodded, smiled, allowed myself to be described in polite euphemisms between jobs, doing things online, figuring it out. And I let them. Because when you're taught not to take up space, you start to believe the best thing you can do is disappear politely. But something changes when you realize your silence was never proof of absence. It was preservation until the moment mattered. That night at my sister's wedding, I didn't crash a narrative. I rewrote it. With one sentence, measured, calm, surgical. Not a speech, not a declaration. Just a shift, one that would echo. Cale would remember. So would Aubrey. So would every guest who heard me and the ones who didn't but felt the silence after. The family that had once ignored me wouldn't suddenly embrace me. That wasn't the point. I didn't need praise. I wasn't auditioning for inclusion. I had already built the thing they thought I was missing, a life. And not just any life. One built on my own metrics, my own pace. Behind closed doors, under NDA, outside of hashtags and holiday letters, but real, solid, independent. The kind of life that didn't need to be validated by photo albums or party seating. The kind of life that only needed one moment, one sentence to alter a room. I didn't carry their doubt home with me. I left it there on table 19 next to the crumpled Sabina card and an empty flute. What I carried instead was weightless, freedom, precision, proof. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel unseen. I just felt enough. I didn't keep the business card. I left it in the pocket of the dress I would never wear again. Not because I didn't want the connection, but because that card didn't represent power anymore. I did. In the days after the wedding, nothing dramatic happened. No family calls begging forgiveness. No viral LinkedIn posts. Just silence. Which was fine. Because silence had always been my space, only now it was mine on purpose. I returned home to the life I'd built in layers, quiet, solid, intentional. No framed diplomas or brag walls, just clean code, whiteboards full of possibilities, and a bank account that made its own kind of statement. But something had shifted permanently, not in them, but in me. There's a difference between being unseen and being underestimated. The former wounds you. The latter can be a gift, because when no one's watching, you can build without performance. You can think without posturing, and when the moment comes, you can strike precisely. That's what the wedding was, a controlled ignition. The years of dismissal paper cuts quiet insults. They were never the end of me. They were friction, fuel, and I carried that fuel into every midnight memo, every deal I guided, every pivot I advised from the shadows, until I no longer needed anyone's permission to take up space. Aubrey didn't text me after the wedding. She didn't follow up with an apology or even a thank you. She just let the silence speak. And maybe that's what we needed. Not forced reconciliation, not a photo op moment of sisterhood, just a new truth between us, an understanding she could never undo. She'd seen what I carried, what I'd become, and she knew it didn't come from her approval. My mother didn't call either, but I saw the ripple. Aunt Trudy mentioned me differently at the next family event. Sabrina, who works with venture groups, as if it had always been common knowledge. Cousin Amanda started liking my old posts. I even got a message from a high school friend asking if I was the same Sabrina Hollis from the wedding. Yes, but not the one they remember. The real version, the one I had always been becoming, was finally visible. Not because they saw me, but because I no longer needed to be seen by them to exist fully. Recognition doesn't have to be loud to be final. Sometimes it's a glance across a room that lingers. Sometimes it's a name remembered in a meeting where you're not present. Sometimes it's a single sentence that echoes longer than applause. I didn't speak to Cale again, but I know he remembered. And the next time a woman in a quiet dress sits near the edge of the room at a wedding or gala or pitch dinner, I bet he looks twice, just in case. As for me, I didn't chase the energy of that moment. I didn't try to replicate the mic drop, because the power wasn't in the shock. It was in the clarity. For the first time in a long time, I stopped shrinking myself for other people's comfort. I stopped dimming the lights so Aubrey could glow brighter. I stopped editing myself to be digestible. I just existed, fully, freely. And that more than anything was the real transformation. Because when you stop trying to be what others need you to be and simply become what you are, everything around you adjusts. Even the people who never thought they'd have to. So no, I didn't keep the business card, but I kept the memory of a room that shifted, of a glass that trembled, of a name remembered, and of a woman who finally knew that she didn't have to raise her voice to raise the bar. Have you ever been erased by the people who were supposed to know you best, treated like background noise in your own story? Sometimes it only takes one moment, one sentence to remind them who you are. If you've lived something like this, share your story in the comments. And if you're still waiting for your moment, it's coming. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for the next story. You're not invisible here. What would you do if your husband of 12 years broke up with you via text while you were helping a customer? It was a Thursday afternoon, warm and ordinary, the kind where nothing major is supposed to happen. I was standing behind the counter at my boutique in Austin helping Mrs. Peterson pick out a silk scarf for her niece. She smiled warmly as I wrapped it in our signature silver tissue, chatting about weekend plans. Then my phone buzzed. Between helping customers at your little shop, I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Ha 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 ha. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. The only visible crack in my mask was a faint tightening at the corners of my eyes. I smiled at Mrs. Peterson as I handed her the wrapped package. "Let me know how she likes it," I said. She waved goodbye. The bell above the door chimed as it closed behind her. Then I picked up my phone and typed back 2 words, "Good luck." That was it. No drama, no breakdown, just clarity. Cold, sharp, and controlled. My name is Claire Harrison. I'm 38, the owner of a boutique I built from the ground up. And that text message, that was the day Mark thought he ended our marriage. But really, it was the day I began writing my own story. See, Mark assumed I'd crumble, that I'd sob in a corner and beg him to come back. But what he didn't know is that I'd been preparing for this for months. The signs had been impossible to ignore. The mysterious late nights that didn't match up with his pay stubs, the new gym membership, the sudden obsession with designer sneakers and slim-fit shirts on a man who'd mocked youth culture just last year. The clincher came 3 months ago. I found a receipt from an upscale steakhouse in downtown Austin, 2 entrees, 2 drinks. That same night, he'd told me he was working late, so I opened a separate account under my name at a different bank. Quietly, deliberately. 1 week later, he suggested we combine all our finances to make things simpler. I smiled sweetly and said, "Of course." Then I moved every penny of my personal savings out of our shared account. The joint account, I left just enough in it to keep things looking normal, 2 months of deposits and predictable expenses. Mark thought he drained our safety net, but really he'd just stolen his own illusion. Then my phone buzzed again. "Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." Melissa, 20 years old, the new receptionist at his office. I remembered her from the Christmas party, fake lashes, too loud laugh, a little too familiar with Mark when she thought no one was watching. She was young enough to be his daughter and naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to that message either. Instead, I called my lawyer. Not a new lawyer, my lawyer. The one I'd met with 2 months ago when I found that hotel charge on our credit card statement. "It's time I said." "She finally made his move?" my lawyer asked calmly. "He did." "I'll file the papers first thing tomorrow," she said. "Do you want him served in Miami?" I smiled. "No rush. Let him think he's won first." Then came another gem. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you've got your little shop to keep you busy." I laughed, out loud. My little shop. The boutique that had been featured in 3 local fashion publications, that out-earned his middle management salary every quarter, that paid for the trips he bragged about at his office. He never understood it, never respected it. But that didn't matter anymore. Because while Mark packed for his fantasy life, I was gathering my evidence folder, the one with screenshots of suspicious credit card charges, late-night texts, and now this beautiful message where he practically confessed to theft and premeditated abandonment. My phone buzzed once more. "BTW, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift. LOL. Perfect." I poured myself a glass of the wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. Then I picked up the phone again. "Mrs. Harrison speaking," I told the credit card rep. "I need to report fraudulent charges." And just like that, the first-class flights and beachfront suite Mark had booked for his big romantic getaway canceled. His fantasy life detoured. The best part, he had no idea what was waiting for him when he landed. But the real shock was still to come. The night before their flight, Mark must have been riding high, probably strutting around Melissa's apartment like some victorious alpha thinking he'd pulled off the perfect exit. In his head, he'd delivered a clean break text, sent money-taken girlfriend, secured life upgraded. But in reality, he'd just declared financial war, and I was already 10 steps ahead. As he packed his overpriced carry-on, my lawyer was finalizing the emergency filing. By the time he reached Miami, the court would already be reviewing his text messages, the ones where he openly admitted to draining our joint account and using shared credit cards to bankroll his romantic escape. My phone buzzed again. "Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller." I actually laughed. Our house, my house, had been in my name long before Mark entered the picture. I'd inherited it from my grandmother, and despite Mark's years of subtle pressure to add his name to the deed, I never caved. Something always told me to hold firm. Another buzz. "And the boutique. We can work out a fair payment for your half." My half. The boutique I built from scratch, while Mark belittled it as a hobby. The one I'd funded myself, managed myself, grown from a tiny Etsy page into a respected storefront in Central Austin, let him dream. I finished my wine, opened my laptop, and scanned through my growing documentation folder. Credit card statements, screenshots of texts, bank transfer receipts, even old voicemails where Mark mocked my control freak tendencies over money, something the court would find rather enlightening. Morning came with fury. Buzz, buzz, buzz. "What the hell did you do to the credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. Hotel says our reservation was canceled. Answer me, Claire." I didn't. Instead, I opened the boutique at 9 a.m. sharp, just like every Friday. A new shipment of designer handbags had arrived, luxury Italian leather limited edition. My assistant helped unpack them while I restocked the displays. Life doesn't stop just because someone throws a tantrum, especially not when that someone is halfway across the country discovering that actions have consequences. Around noon, the phone rang. It was Barbara Mark's mother. "Claire, dear." She said, her voice dripping with concern. "Mark told us everything, about how controlling you've been. He says you're being vindictive now, interfering with his travel. He just wants to move on." I calmly put her on speaker while arranging our front window display. "Barbara," I said, smoothing out a silk scarf. "Did Mark mention draining our joint account and using our credit card to take his receptionist on a luxury trip?" Silence? "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold, distant. I have the texts I said plainly. Would you like me to read you the one where he mocked my age, or the one where he called my boutique a little shop, more silence?" "He did seem a bit cruel," she muttered. I told him that message was inappropriate. "I appreciate the call, Barbara, but my lawyers advised me to limit contact with Mark's family. The proceedings are already underway." "Proceedings? Yes. Goodbye, Barbara." I hung up. By late afternoon, word had spread like wildfire. Mark's sister Amanda posted a vague Facebook status about choosing the wrong side. Mutual friends were already whispering about how Mark and Melissa had ended up stuck at a budget motel near the airport. Apparently, after I canceled the cards, he tried using his personal ones, only to discover most were maxed out. Another red flag I'd noticed. But like always, he assumed I wasn't paying attention. My lawyer called. "We've got an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday," she said. "Given his admitted misuse of funds and the documentation you've provided, we're in a strong position to freeze the remaining assets." "Has he been served yet?" I asked. "Not yet, but we have a new address for him, thanks to his girlfriend's Instagram." I laughed. Melissa had been posting nonstop about their Freedom Adventure beach selfies, fruity cocktails, even one post mocking bitter exes in a now-deleted caption. Perfect. Public evidence of the affair plus their current location. By the way, my lawyer added she also posted a picture of Mark poolside captioned, "Best man ever." That should play nicely when we argue premeditation. My phone buzzed again. "You think you're smart, but I made copies of all your boutique's financial records. Half of it is mine." I forwarded the message to my lawyer. "Let him believe that," she said. "He clearly doesn't understand how business incorporation works, especially when it's sole proprietorship with full documentation from before the marriage." I nodded. Sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or crying. It's being quiet, watching, planning, documenting. Mark had spent months constructing his fantasy of escape, convinced I was too naive, too dependent, too slow to notice. But he'd mistaken my silence for weakness. And now, with the law on my side and evidence mounting the story he thought he was writing, was crumbling beneath him. But he still hadn't seen the courtroom. And that would be his biggest surprise yet. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, though the AC was definitely on full blast, but in atmosphere. Clinical. Sterile. A place where drama becomes documentation and betrayal becomes evidence. Mark arrived 10 minutes late, of course, wearing a pair of designer jeans that clung too tightly to his midsection, a blazer 2 shades too bright, and the smug grin of a man who still thought he could charm his way out of accountability. Melissa wasn't by his side. She lingered in the hallway, flipping through her phone, visibly uncomfortable under the fluorescent lights. Her confidence from Instagram didn't seem to survive in person. Mark sauntered to his seat like it was a job interview, not a legal reckoning. My lawyer, impeccable as always, stood and began, with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, we present documented evidence of financial misconduct, including text messages from Mr. Harrison admitting he emptied a joint account, committed unauthorized credit card use, and attempted to claim separate property without entitlement." She slid the first exhibit across the table, the text where Mark gleefully announced his departure, the drained account, and his parting gift, booking the trip with Melissa. Mark's lawyer, clearly assembled last minute, tried to respond. "My client admits to some impulsive behavior," he began, but Mrs. Harrison's response has been unnecessarily vindictive, and calculating, my lawyer interrupted, is not the same as vindictive. "My client protected her assets, maintained meticulous financial records, and refrained from emotional retaliation. That's not vindictiveness. That's intelligence." The judge, an older woman with tired eyes and no patience for theatrics, raised a hand to stop them. "Let's be clear. Mr. Harrison, do you deny using the joint credit card to book travel with a third party?" Mark shifted. I was just trying to make a clean break by committing financial fraud," the judge asked. He flushed. "It wasn't fraud." You're not a lawyer, Mr. Harrison, and this isn't a debate club." Then she turned to the next page in her file, the business records. "Mrs. Harrison, can you confirm this boutique was established before the marriage?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "The LLC was filed in my name 6 months before we were married. I've kept the account's tax filings and profits completely separate from our personal finances." My lawyer added, "In fact, Mr. Harrison routinely referred to it as her little hobby, as evidenced in the attached text messages." Mark's lawyer pushed again. "But the business grew during their marriage. My client should be entitled to a portion of its value." The judge didn't even blink, and yet the business was never commingled, never funded with joint assets, and was managed independently. This isn't community property. This is careful planning. Mark finally lost composure. "She's trying to destroy me. She froze everything. I don't even have money for rent. Mr. Harrison," the judge said firmly, "you are responsible for that situation. You initiated the separation by draining the account. You then used marital resources to finance a trip with a third party. You escalated the situation. Your wife responded with legal recourse. But she's freezing my accounts," he snapped. "No," the judge said. "I am." She paused for effect, then continued. "The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. All shared accounts will remain frozen pending full dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return all misappropriated funds within 24 hours. But that money's gone, he mumbled. We spent it. Then I suggest you figure out a way to return it, the judge snapped, because the court will not shoulder your irresponsibility. As the judge moved on to the business claims, Mark tried again. Half of that boutique should be mine. I was her partner. My lawyer didn't even look up from her file. Text messages, Your Honor, referring to the boutique as a little shop, just a hobby, and a waste of her time. She handed them to the bailiff. Not exactly how one describes a business they co-own. The judge flipped through them with a raised brow. This court sees no evidence of shared ownership or contribution from Mr. Harrison. The boutique remains sole property of Mrs. Harrison. The house deed shows sole ownership pre-marriage. As such, it too remains hers. Mark deflated. It was like watching a balloon lose air in slow motion. The man who'd swaggered in now slouched in his chair, his fantasy of a clean, victorious break fading into cold legal reality. Outside the courthouse, I passed Melissa in the hallway. She glanced up, then quickly looked away. Mark followed a few minutes later, storming out behind me. You've ruined me, he hissed. I'll have to move back in with my parents. I turned, met his eyes without flinching. No, Mark, you ruined yourself. I just made sure you couldn't ruin me too. His mother was waiting by the curb, arms crossed, expression tight. She opened the passenger door wordlessly. As he climbed in, I heard her voice rise. Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old stealing from your own wife? Those texts, do you know how humiliating this is? I didn't stick around for the rest. My heels echoed confidently across the courthouse steps as I walked back to my car. Not as a woman abandoned, not as a woman destroyed, but as a woman who had prepared, endured, and quietly won. And while Mark retreated to his childhood bedroom, I returned to the business he never believed in, the one that would soon define the rest of my life. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread. 3 days after the hearing, Amanda Mark's sister walked into my boutique. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked uneasy, like someone preparing to confess. I know we didn't believe you at first, she said gently, fingering a silk scarf from the new spring collection. But after the hearing, after seeing what he said, what he wrote, I'm ashamed we took his side. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He told us you were controlling, she continued, voice lowering, that you sabotaged him. But then I saw the texts, saw how he gloated about stealing your money. That wasn't the brother I grew up with. I gave her a small smile. He didn't become someone else, Amanda. He just stopped hiding it. As Amanda left with the scarf she hadn't planned to buy, I glanced at the front window. The boutique was buzzing. More customers than usual. Some came for the clothes, but others came for the story. Rumors had spread. A woman in town had flipped the script, outmaneuvered a cheating husband, protected her assets, and came out on top. I never confirmed anything, never spoke about the divorce, but that silence only added fuel to the fire. You're an inspiration, one woman whispered while trying on a statement coat. My ex tried to take everything in our divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. She left with the coat and a matching handbag. Even the local business journal reached out wanting to do a feature not about the divorce, but about the strategy, the growth, the way I'd scaled a boutique into a growing brand while navigating personal chaos. Meanwhile, Mark was floundering. The promotion he'd been banking on gone. HR had launched an investigation into his relationship with Melissa, the subordinate. Turns out the company wasn't thrilled about the optics of their office romance, especially after his ex-wife filed court documents detailing the affair. He tried to claim age discrimination when the role went to someone else. Amanda told me, smirking. He said they punished him for dating someone younger. HR apparently just added that complaint to his file. Melissa, on the other hand, had gone quiet. Her social media posts dried up. No more cocktails. No more beach selfies. The grand escape had turned into a Motel 6 detour and awkward silences. Through mutual friends, I heard they were fighting. Mark had assumed her small studio apartment was temporary. that she'd eventually move with him into a luxury place. She assumed he had money, stability, a plan. Instead, she got a grown man pacing her living room, muttering about court documents and how everyone was out to get him. It didn't last long. She left, moved back in with a roommate, started posting about toxic relationships and being careful who you trust. One post simply read, "Not all midlife crises come with a warning label." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the smirk she gave me at that Christmas party, the one where she draped herself over Mark's arm and laughed just a little too loudly. Maybe she didn't deserve everything that followed, but she'd played her part in the performance. Mark's desperation only deepened. He filed a petition to challenge the divorce settlement again, claimed it was unfair, that he'd been misled, that I'd hidden money. My lawyer called laughing. The judge dismissed it in under 5 minutes, she said. He actually tried to argue that the ha-ha in his text proved it was a joke, not theft. She paused. Also, he's been gambling online. His mother called me. I raised an eyebrow. Called you. She wanted to know if you'd consider waiving some of the financial penalties. Said he's under stress. I leaned back in my office chair and looked across the boutique floor. The display windows sparkled with curated elegance. My staff helped customers with ease and warmth. No, I said, absolutely not. Mark had already taken too much. Instead of repairing his life, he was chasing shortcuts, a pyramid scheme 1 month, crypto the next. He'd become the kind of man who believed luck owed him a comeback. But life doesn't reward entitlement. It rewards preparation. I'd moved on. The boutique had expanded. I'd opened a second location in Houston, and plans for a third in Dallas were underway. My staff had grown from 2 to 10. And for the first time, I felt what Mark had always feared: independence, not survival, thriving. His mother called again. This time she didn't ask for favors. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "You taught us something. About enabling, about ignoring red flags. We kept making excuses for him, but we're done now. We're not bailing him out again." I didn't know what to say, so I said the only honest thing I could. "I hope he learns something from all this." "So do I," she whispered, "but I'm not holding my breath." That night I opened a bottle of wine, not to numb anything, just to celebrate, quietly, alone, with dignity. I poured a glass and glanced up at the framed text on my wall, the message that started it all. "Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." Beneath it hung my latest business award, Best Small Business Growth Central Texas Region. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It isn't messy. Sometimes it's a well-lit boutique on a busy street. Sometimes it's success delivered in silence. But the past wasn't done with me yet. One day, someone from that chapter walked back into my life. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon sun streaming through the boutique windows, soft jazz playing overhead, the scent of fresh peonies from the front display. I was restocking a shelf of limited edition sunglasses when the doorbell chimed. I turned, expecting a regular. Instead, I saw her, Melissa. She looked different. Still young, yes, but not the radiant, smug girl from Mark's social media posts. She was thinner, paler. Her hair, once curled to perfection, hung limp against her shoulders. She clutched her purse tightly in front of her like a shield. "Hi," she said softly, almost like she wasn't sure she belonged there. "Hi," I replied just as softly. She hesitated at the doorway, then took a few tentative steps inside. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor. She glanced at the shelves, the displays, the quiet elegance of the boutique she once dismissed with a smirk. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. I didn't respond. I just waited. I believed everything he told me. She continued. "That you were cold, controlling, that you didn't support his dreams. He made you sound like the villain." And then I asked. She looked down. Then I watched him try the same tactics on me, the manipulation, the guilt trips, the blame. When things didn't go perfectly, he started calling me controlling, said I didn't understand him, that I was stifling his potential. I nodded slowly. "Those weren't dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference. She gave a hollow laugh. I learned that fast. He told me moving into my apartment was temporary, that he'd have us living in a penthouse by the end of the year. But after 2 weeks of complaining about the closet space and asking if I could maybe take out a loan to help get us into a bigger place, I understood. She looked up. I understood you. I raised an eyebrow. Took you long enough. She smiled sheepishly. Yeah, it did. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by silence and the soft hum of the store's ambiance. It wasn't awkward. It was resolved. I'm dating someone my own age now, she said. We live in a tiny apartment. We've got student loans, mismatched plates, and a leaky faucet. But it's real. No delusions, no grand escapes. Just real. I gave her a small nod. That's worth more than any penthouse built on lies. Melissa wandered toward a display of handbags. She touched the strap of a deep plum leather piece, tracing the stitching with her fingers. You've built something beautiful here, she murmured. And you did it without him. I did it in spite of him, I corrected gently. She smiled again, then placed the bag back on the shelf and turned to leave. Thank you, she said before walking out. As the door closed behind her, my assistant manager leaned in from behind the register. Was that the girlfriend? No, I said, glancing at the door one last time. That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did. Later that afternoon, I sat down with that same assistant, Sierra sharp as a tack and hungry to grow, and we reviewed mock-ups for our new accessory line. She'd pitched the idea of a legacy collection inspired by resilience and designed by women who had rebuilt their lives. I loved it. The boutique had become more than a business. It was now a symbol, a sanctuary. Young entrepreneurs started coming to me for advice, women launching Etsy shops designing jewelry from their kitchen tables, building candle brands in their garages. They asked how I protected my assets, how I kept my emotions from blinding my judgment, how I bounced back. I always said the same thing. The best protection is preparation, and trust your instincts even when love tells you not to. Mark, on the other hand, was still spiraling. My lawyer updated me once a month, mostly for entertainment value. He'd tried online gambling, a drop shipping business, selling fake investment courses through a shady coaching website. All failed. His mother called one final time, not to plead, not to scold, but to thank me. You taught our family something important, she said, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Apparently even she had stopped defending him, said he still lived at home, still blamed everyone but himself, still talked about what he lost, never about what he'd thrown away. That's your legacy to our family, she said. You made us see clearly. I thought about that. Legacy. Not the kind that comes with wealth or inheritance, but the kind that quietly changes people. That shows others what's possible when you stop apologizing for being smart, cautious, and strong. Mark had wanted to reduce me to a sob story, a cautionary tale. Instead, I became something else. The woman who survived the storm, the woman who turned betrayal into fuel, and in the most ironic twist of all, Melissa, the girl he left me for, now shopped at my boutique. She even started her own company, a small social media consulting firm. One day she tagged us in a post with the caption, "Inspired by women who build, not break." Claire Harrison, boutique owner, businesswoman, divorcee. But more than that, a woman no longer underestimated. And the final chapter, that would be mine to write. 5 years ago, I stood behind the boutique counter with a phone in my hand and a message that should have broken me. Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age. 5 years later, that little shop had become a 5-location brand, spanning from Austin to Dallas to San Antonio. Each boutique uniquely designed, each staff carefully trained, and each window display a quiet testament to everything I had built by myself. The framed text still hung in my office, but now it sat beneath something else, a gold plaque from the National Small Business Association honoring excellence in entrepreneurial leadership. Success, it turns out, has a beautiful sense of irony. I was invited to speak at a women's business conference in downtown Austin. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal or revenge. It was resilience, asset protection, emotional clarity in business. During the Q&A session, a woman early 30s, newly married, stood up voice, hesitant but firm. "My husband says I'm being paranoid for keeping my business account separate," she said. "That if we're married, we should trust each other with everything." Am I wrong? I didn't blink. "My ex-husband said the same thing," I replied, watching the nods ripple through the crowd, right up until he tried to take half of what he never helped build. Laughter followed, and something else: relief, validation, that quiet exhale of women realizing they weren't alone in their caution. Afterward, a young woman approached me in the hallway. She looked barely 21, nervous, but inspired. "My mom went through something like you did," she said, "but she didn't fight back. You make it feel possible." I hugged her. Sometimes the only legacy we need is giving someone else permission to rise. Meanwhile, Mark had finally moved out of his parents' house. Word got around he'd taken a job at a small logistics firm, not managerial, not glamorous, just enough to cover rent in a tiny apartment above someone's garage. His dating profile, according to Amanda, still claimed he was young at heart and self-employed, despite no business license or income to prove it. Melissa, ironically, had become one of my most loyal customers. She never spoke about Mark again, but I caught glimpses of her growth. She earned her business degree, launched her social media agency, and frequently tagged our boutique in posts promoting women-led businesses. One day, she walked in with a client and whispered, "You inspired me. You showed me that women can build something lasting instead of chasing someone else's promises." And that was the kind of legacy I hadn't planned but was proud to own. At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, we turned the store into an elegant soiree. Champagne flowed, string lights sparkled overhead. Old customers returned, new ones explored, and my entire staff celebrated a milestone none of us had imagined on that first difficult day. I stood up to give a speech. 5 years ago, I almost gave up on this place, I told the crowd. Not because I doubted the business, but because someone else did. Someone who thought my age, my ambition, and my independence were a liability. I looked at the framed text on the back wall. A few people gasped when they realized what it said. "Have fun with your little shop." I smiled. That little shop now employs 30 people, serves thousands of customers, and inspired hundreds more to start their own. The applause was thunderous. After the event, I noticed an uninvited guest standing quietly in the back. Barbara, Mark's mother. She was dressed in one of our boutique's signature navy wrap dresses, her hair elegantly pinned. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said quietly, joining me near the refreshment table. I said nothing, just waited. "He was talking about his glory days," she continued. "Said you stole everything from him. Still doesn't understand that he didn't lose it all. He threw it away." She smoothed her dress. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm proud of you for everything, for how you handled it, for how you grew through it." I nodded. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She hesitated. "He still talks about the boutique, about how it was his idea, how he helped inspire it." I gave a small, exhausted laugh. "He still wants to rewrite the story." "He can't," she said firmly. "You already published the truth. We parted ways after that. Her with her quiet regrets, me with my growing legacy." Later that evening, my assistant, yes, another Melissa coincidence of the century, approached with a question about our new inventory system. As we reviewed it, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the store window. A woman in her 40s, confident, grounded, smiling. Not a victim, not a scorned ex-wife, not a cautionary tale, but someone who had taken a knife meant to wound and carved a new life with it. I thought about all the women who'd walked through my doors, hurting, healing, rebuilding. I thought about the younger me who once feared everything would crumble if love disappeared. She had no idea that losing him would be the best thing that ever happened. And I thought about Mark, still chasing shortcuts, still rewriting history, still bitter that I turned his betrayal into my beginning. He wanted to destroy me. All he did was set me free. So if you're listening, if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, replaced, just remember, you don't have to get even. You just have to get better. And believe me, success, it's the best revenge.